city of Heidelberg, where I also live. But I'm actually from Denmark. Been in Germany for roughly a year. I'm also part of the SAP Mentors program, and I'm a big fan of SAP community events, the Inside Track in particular. I used to run the one in Copenhagen alongside with Anne, who's hiding a little bit here at the front row. Yeah, that's enough for now. I put my coordinates here for LinkedIn and SAP community if you should need them. A little bit of alignment of expectations. The topic is about CPI Lint for cloud integration. There'll be a demo that will probably make the most sense if you know a little bit about cloud integration. If you know nothing at all about cloud integration, I'll give you a brief introduction, and you'll still get to learn a bit about automating quality checks, why that's a good thing, a little bit about open source, and a bit about terminal applications, command line applications in general. So there should be some stuff for you also if you know nothing absolutely about cloud integration. Okay, so for that brief introduction, cloud integration is SAP's process integration platform for the cloud. It's part of the bigger product called the Integration Suite, along with a bunch of other capabilities like API management and so on. And cloud integration is related to SAP process orchestration, PO, PI, etc. But unlike those on-prem solutions, cloud integration was built for the cloud from the ground up. So it's not a PO in the cloud, but they are related in concepts, right? Because those platforms are still about connecting systems, having messages flowing back and forth, transforming message formats and so on. So some of the concepts are overlapping, right? Under the hood, cloud integration runs the open source integration platform called Apache Camel. And you model your integrations visually. I'll show you an example. This is a so-called integration flow. It sort of looks like a process model diagram, right? But it's the actual integration that you're working on in the tools. This particular one replicates cost centers between your SAP system and SuccessFactors in the cloud. It's part of the prepackaged content that SAP delivers as part of the license for cloud integration. There are loads of those, thousands actually, on the Business Accelerator Hub. Yeah, what Gartner calls packaged integration processes, PIPs. One of the major selling points for cloud integration. And I think, yeah, you could probably see from the screenshot that it can get fairly complicated, and there's a lot of basically freedom in how you model your processes in cloud integration. And this is, I think, particularly if you're coming from PO, this is very different because PO is very strict in how you can build your integrations. It's very rigid. And when you come to cloud integration, you get a lot of flexibility. And don't get me wrong, that's a very good thing. But it can lead to, especially if you have a lot of people working on integrations, it can be harder to get consistency because people build things in different ways. And that's possible in cloud integration because of the freedom. But with the consistency, it's basically easier to build new things because you don't have to think as much, and it's easier to maintain existing stuff and debug it because you already going in have certain expectations about how it works if they are built consistently, right? So integration governance is a huge topic, also covering many other topics that are not really about the development, but part of that governance should be some guidelines for how to build these integration flows because you have all this freedom, right? I listed some examples here more or less randomly. These guidelines can be about how to do mappings, how to do scripting, which of the adapters you are allowed to use. You should follow certain naming conventions, etc. So you write that up in a document, and this document basically answers the question, how do we build integrations around here? And that's cool, but there's a problem built in, which is that a lot of the time this document ends up in Confluence or SharePoint somewhere, sort of gathering dust, right? You can point your developers, consultants to it and say, yeah, this is how we do things. But you don't really know actually if the integrations are compliant with these guidelines. Because to find out, you would have to manually go to each one and have a look, right? And that's very tedious, obviously. It's very error prone because it's not a task that humans are good at. And absolutely, it does not scale if you have a lot of integrations, a lot of content, which most companies do, right? And this problem only grows if you have more people and if you have more content, and it becomes unmanageable, basically. So you cannot really answer the question at any one point in time, are my integrations compliant with our guidelines? And that's the problem I was trying to solve with CPI Lint. So with that bit of context, I can better answer the question, what is CPI Lint? It's a tool that automates those checks I just talked about. It ships with a number of rules built in that you can choose from, set up the rules you want to check, and then the tool does all the hard work of going to your tenant, going to each integration flow, going through the rules, giving you a report of were they compliant or not. It's a command line tool, as you'll get to see in the demo. Means that you can run it interactively, as I'll be doing. You can also run it in a CI/CD pipeline. Quite a lot of people are doing that, and organizations are running CPI Lint in their pipelines. Released back in 2019, just had its 5th anniversary. That's where the birthday cake is from. There's been 5 new versions since then. The latest one just back in August of this year. So yeah, introduce just a couple of examples of the rules. At the moment, there are 24 different variations of rules. Some of them are, naming conventions is exactly what you think it is. It's how to set up rules about how to name things in your integration flows. Probably the #1 requested feature of them all in CPI Lint that was added 2 versions ago. Duplicate resources also does what it says on the tin, right? It checks your iFlows for duplicate stuff, like scripts, XML schemas, XSLT, style sheets, and so on. Also very useful for finding scripts that really should go into a script collection, because that's where you want duplicate stuff to go, right? User roles is about those sender channels in cloud integration that use the user role for authorization. And you can basically set up which roles are allowed, which roles are not allowed in particular. And the very obvious use case for this is disallowing the use of the default role for everything, ESB messaging.send. All the cloud integration people in here know this one. And a lot of the time, it just gets left in place, and that's a bad idea. Java archives let you set up rules for which archives are allowed to be added to your iFlows, which Java libraries. It came in very handy during the Log4j security incident some time ago. Sender adapters, receiver adapters is about which adapters are you allowed to use. So if all inbound calls should be OData, you can set that up in these rules. Of certain outbound channels are not allowed, you can set that up also. All the rules are in the wiki. I got a link here. But one key takeaway, it's not the case that these rules are best practices in themselves. You just pick and choose the ones that make sense and just ignore the rest, because you'll probably never use all the rules, but select the ones that do make sense for your specific context. I'll get to a demo in just a moment, but before that, I'll talk a little bit about the name. Why is it called CPI Lint? Anyway, can break it down into CPI, short for SAP Cloud Integration, and Lint, or a linter, which is a tool. Yeah, I just copied the Wikipedia definition here. It flags programming errors, bugs, stylistic errors, and suspicious constructs. So it's basically a tool that analyzes your code and comes up with suggestions for improvements. We have a few of them in the SAP world. ABAP Lint for the ABAP programming language. Just recently came to the version 1.0, the UI5 linter for UI5. I think probably the UI5 people also know ESLint for JavaScript, and there are tons of others out there. So CPI Lint is a linter for cloud integration. And yeah, about CPI, definitely it is an outdated abbreviation. The name changed in 2021 from Cloud Platform Integration, where CPI comes from, to SAP Cloud Integration. Personally, I don't really feel we have a new and better abbreviation, so I stuck with this one. But yes, it's strictly out of date. Okay, I've got a very simple demo. I'm running it locally from my machine just to not take any chances with the demo gods. I've got two very simple iFlows just for demo purposes. I'm going to show them here. I've got some screenshots. Hang on. Yeah, first one here has a sender FTP channel that sends in a message. Got a content modifier. I didn't bother to change the name here. I got a little lazy. And it sends the message to another iFlow using the process direct channel here with a certain process direct channel address that matches this inbound process direct in the other iFlow. And here I'm doing an XSLT mapping and then storing this message in the data store, where I just took the default values, which means that it gets encrypted when I'm saving it. So yeah, and one more point that's not actually visible on the slides, that the first integration flow has a description of how it works typed in the UI, and the second one doesn't. Okay, so let's drop out of the slides here. And first here, I'll show you this rules file, which is basically just an XML document, which is where you store the rules that you want to check. I'll just go through these briefly. First one here is about which adapters are allowed, and I'm specifically disallowing FTP for security reasons. I don't want center FTP at all. Then I've got a rule here that says that if you have a sender process direct channel, you need to have a matching receiver, and the names have to match up, because otherwise this will break at runtime. A simple one that says that every iFlow needs a description. So a good practice, document what it's doing. Slightly more complicated rule here, which is about the naming. I don't think we need to go into the details, but it's this particular one. Yeah, okay, I'll give you the details. It applies to content modifier names, and the naming scheme here is a regular expression that says content modifier and some numbers, and wrapped in not here, so we should not name content modifiers this default name. Second to last here, which mapping types are allowed. We only allow message mappings, so the graphical visual mapping. And the last one here goes, if you write to the data store, it should be encrypted. So those are the rules I've selected for my tenant, right? So now I want to actually run them. And now we go to the command line. I've got CPI lint installed on this machine. Replies that it's in place. And basically you can run it in two different ways. Normally, I would run this against my tenant. It would communicate with my tenant using the OData API to fetch all the iFlows or the ones I want checked. And I'll authorize against the tenant using OAuth. And I will always get the latest versions of the iFlows and so on. Just to make sure that this would work, I use the second option, which is I can download iFlows to my machine and just check them there. So, sorry, I've got two zip files here, those two downloaded iFlows, right? So when I run the command, I need to tell it which rules to check. That's the file we just saw. And then I'll point it to those two files. So these are the specific ones I want to check. Had I pointed this to the tenant, I could choose to check everything, certain packages, certain iFlows, etc. But for this demo, I'm just going to check those two specific files. So let's see how it goes. Yeah, if I go to the bottom here, lets us know that it checked two iFlows. It found 4 issues. And these issues align pretty well with what we saw, right? The first one does FTP, that was not allowed. It also had a content modifier that used the default name, that's not allowed. The second one didn't have a description, so that gets flagged. And it used an XSLT mapping, that was not allowed, only message mapping, so that also gets flagged. Yeah, I think we can go back to the slides here. Okay, so now when you've seen it, I think it makes sense to talk a little bit more about how it works. Those other linters I mentioned, they all pretty much work in the same way, right? They perform what's called static analysis. So CPI lint looks at your integration flows, it analyzes them, inspects them, but it doesn't actually run them. Right? There are no messages going through the system or anything. So this is passive analysis of the iFlows. When you use the option to check against your tenant, it does so using the OData API. So there are APIs for getting all the packages in your system, getting all the iFlows, getting the content of an iFlow to download it, and so on. All using the official API. Once we've got the iFlows internally, they are stored as XML documents using a standard called BPMN. That's an industry standard, right? So it's not invented by SAP in this case. And most of the rules, they work on this BPMN XML. So they analyze the XML. Some of them only look at the resources like scripts and so on, like the duplicate content one. Doesn't actually look at this XML, only at various resource files. I can give an example. We've talked, we had the FTP, sender FTP was not allowed rule. And in the BPMN, channels they're called message flows in BPMN, and they have various properties. And those properties are, for instance, the direction of the channel. So I can look for senders. It's the adapter type, so I can look for FTP and so on. So that particular rule then goes to the XML, looks for message flows, checks those properties. If it finds them, it then flags that particular channel, right, as not being allowed. Yeah, why command line? Why doesn't it have a nice looking Fiori user interface? It could have, definitely. Part of it is just preference on my part, right? I'm very used to text-based interfaces and command lines, like the Commodore 64 in the screenshot. But mainly, really, it's about the flexibility you're getting. I talked about that a little bit already. I could run the tool from my machine. I can put it in a pipeline, CI/CD. I can write a script to run it, and if there are issues, it can send me an email. I can schedule this to run at night if I want. All of this flexibility really comes from having that simple command line command to execute. And a GUI CPI lint would have to have all of this stuff built in, right? I would have to anticipate however people would want to use it and then put that in the GUI. And it wouldn't have this versatility. Right? So with a command line application, it takes a little getting used to, especially if you're not normally working on the command line, but it also gives you a ton of flexibility in how to actually use it. Also, I'm not really good at GUI programming anyway. Sure, it's the main code is Java. Then I get asked about this quite a lot recently. I think those of you who work with cloud integration are aware of SAP's design guidelines for integration flows. They've been documented on the SAP Help portal for years, basically. So they are recommendations for how to build UI flows. But it's pretty much the situation that I described in the beginning, right? That you have some written recommendations sitting somewhere, SAP Help portal, but it's very easy to ignore written guidelines sitting in a portal, right? So since April of this year, it's been built into the Cloud Integration UI that you can run checks of these guidelines. I think there's something like 30, 40 guidelines that are currently checked. So this is quite similar to CPI lint, right? It's both tools are really a way to make those guidelines executable. So in that sense, they are quite similar. I would say for the rules that are actually checked, they are quite different. There's very little overlap, something like 1 or 2 rules. There's a check for CSRF in both. I think actually this default user role I talked about, that's also checked in the design guidelines. But apart from that, there's very little overlap. The design guidelines are more about performance, stability, and so on of your integration flows. And CPI lint, I would say, is more about this question of how do we do things around here. So they are less black and white, stuff you should always do or stuff you should never do. And the design guidelines are more about that. So yeah, I get asked, should I use one or the other? And definitely you should use both because you'll get better coverage of best practices and your own rules at the same time, right? There's a screenshot up there, yeah, right, of how it looks in the UI for the design guidelines embedded in the Cloud Integration UI. Very cool feature. I've talked a little bit about CPI lint being open source. And yeah, what does that mean for you in reality? Well, 2 things. It means, of course, that you have access to the source code. It's Java code, but not only the Java, but also every other file you would need if you want to build this yourself. So build files, everything that goes into the distribution, it's all there. It's on GitHub, and when you download the tool, it's also included in the download. So if you want to know how a certain rule works, you can basically just go to the code. But yeah, I think at this point, we are all aware that having access to source code is not the same as something being open source, because the real pressing question is, what are you allowed to do with that code, right? And that's the license territory. So that's the second point, that the license of CPI lint allows you to modify the code, basically almost do what you want, right? It's licensed under the MIT license, which is very, very straightforward. It's even pretty short and readable, unlike some of the others. You can actually read it and understand it. And it's very permissive in the sense that it lets you do pretty much whatever you want. So if you want to take something out, add something, change something, the license absolutely allows you to do that. Right. How to get up and running with CPI lint if you've seen something you like. It's fairly straightforward. You need Java on the system that you want to run it on, so on your own laptop or the CI/CD pipeline or wherever. Right now, Java 11 is enough. This will change soon because Java 11 is also getting a little bit old. So this will update to the next long-term support Java version. But really, it's about going to GitHub, downloading the release, and then following the installation guidelines. Links are in the slides. And it's very straightforward. Unpack the zip file, 1 or 2 steps, and you're done. If you are a technically minded person and you want to play around with the code, there are also some build instructions in there linking to GitHub. But this is, only if you're a developer or technically inclined and you want to know more about how stuff works and if you want to make changes. If you just want to use the tool, it's just the 2 first steps, right? Download latest release, follow the instructions in the wiki, and that's it. A little bit about what's on the roadmap for CPI lint. Well, yeah, first off, rules are at the core of what the tool is about, so more rules are coming. Always a very long list of my own ideas and suggestions from users, so yeah, more rules are coming. Also adding a feature to implement exemptions, so a way to say that certain iflows are excluded from certain rules, because in some cases there's a very good reason why an integration flow cannot be compliant with a specific rule, or maybe there's no good reason, but you just can't change that integration flow, right? And right now you will get flagged every time you run CPI lint about this issue. That kind of thing is not good because it's noise and you just train yourself to ignore it, and you shouldn't really ignore the output of a linter or like warnings, etc. So it will be possible to put in exemptions later on. This is actually already in the design guidelines of cloud integration. Next one, naming conventions supports a lot of different parts of iFlows that you can put in rules about the naming. Not all of them, so even more are coming. And the last one is something I'm really excited about, is the opportunity to add your own rules. So right now, the rules supported are the ones that are built in, right? And you can pick and choose. But if you have something that's very specific to your particular circumstances, that will probably never be added as a rule, right? But what some people have done is to then fork the GitHub repository and add in their own rules, and that's cool. I'm totally happy with that. But it should be easier to do that, right? So extensibility will be in the next version, where it's easy to code your own rules and add them to the tool and have them checked along with the built-in rules. Yeah, and in general, suggestions, ideas, you can create an issue on GitHub. Issues are not just for problems, they can also be for suggestions and ideas. You're also very welcome to talk to me about it. I'm always very happy to hear about new ideas. And maybe the most important thing of all, CPI lint stickers. If you are interested in one, I put a few out on the table outside with the other stickers. And on that note, got to the end of the presentation. Very happy to answer questions. We do have some time. If you come up with them after the event, also very welcome to ping me on LinkedIn. Also, if you have issues, of course. Thank you.
So, any questions? Yes. Oh, come on, Max.
Thank you, Morten. Is that on? Can you hear me? Do you have any rough numbers of customers that are using that?
Actually not. And this is, it's a good question. I used to, a long time ago, run another open source project called Detribulator, unit testing for PO and PI. And I had exactly the same issue that I didn't know at all until people came up to me at conferences and so on, having questions or to say this is a great tool or it sucks. But very often I don't get that feedback. So yeah, let me encourage everybody to, if you're actually using it, I'd love to hear about it. So I don't have any numbers at all. I hear about it sometimes, you know, when people comment on the SAP community because they have an issue. But if everything's running smoothly, some of those CI/CD cases I hadn't heard about until they published about it. And yeah, so I don't have any numbers. I would love to have them and to share them, but yeah, it's no, sorry.
Okay. Second question, do you want to go back to slide 7?
Which one was that?
Slide 7 is the one with the cake. So we had an ongoing discussion in the last row. What kind of cake is that? Is that chocolate combined with cheese?
Okay, now we're getting to the really deep dive, interesting questions. It's called a kageman in Danish. It's a cake man, literally. It's chocolate, yeah, on top, and a dough beneath. But sorry, no cheese. I think the square is marzipan, and then just candies strewn on top. It's probably Haribo, yeah, actually, which I thought for many years was Danish. It's obviously German, but yeah. Thank you. Good question, Max.
But Max, we can prepare a cake in the cake break for you with a cheese on it. No problem. Any other questions regarding cake or CPI lint?
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation.
Sure.
And I come from another technology. I mean, I work with another technology that is SAP Commerce, and therefore with the Java mainly. And in Java, basically, we use SonarLint, for example, for the static code analysis. I saw a very similar concept with the SAPI lint. The question is, for example, in Java, there is a SonarCube, okay, where you can basically, at the cloud level, you can transmit all information regarding the analysis. In this case, and the SonarCube can be configured in the appropriate way with some profiles, okay?
Marco, can you?
Okay. Here you mentioned that, for example, the design guidelines are a little bit different from CPI lint. I mean, in terms of rules, it's possible to configure CPI lint so that has the same design guidelines of SAP. I mean, this is my question.
Right. That's a good question. It would be possible. I mean, could implement the same rules, right? But that wouldn't really be a productive use of the time, I think. What I would really like is for the design guidelines to have an API that you can execute them from the outside of the tenant, right? Because then you could run both at the same time. That would be the ideal world for me.
To use both, basically.
So you can use both, and you can run them at the same time. You can capture all the issues at the same time. But at this point, it doesn't have an API, the design guidelines. I don't know if something like that is in the works. I hope so. But yeah, that would be the ideal way to do this, to run both at the same time, but not have the duplication of the rules between them. Other
So,
questions?
thank you very much, Morten.
Thank you.